Okay. Thanks for having me here to speak today. I'm an entomologist at the University of Guelph, and I'm one of the researchers working on the Switchgrass Midge project. I think in the program it says 2023 update, but then I realized when I started putting this together, there's some stuff from 2022 that we had not yet presented, so it's actually an update across both years. Okay, so I'll start by just giving a really brief overview of the background of Switchgrass Midge. So it was first discovered in South Dakota in 2008. And at that time, it was found in both agricultural and ornamental plantings there. And then it was first observed in Ontario in 2020 by Hannah Fraser from OMAFRA. I'm just going to take a second to briefly go over its life cycle because I talk about each of its life stages separately throughout the presentation. So we'll start with the adult. The adult is a free-flying midge, a type of fly. So the adults emerge in late spring or early summer. They mate, and then the females lay their eggs on switchgrass plants. At least that's where we think they're laying their eggs, but I'll talk more about eggs in a while. So then eventually those eggs hatch into larvae. And switchgrass midge has three stages of larvae, or what entomologists call instars. These stages are actually not very well defined in the sense that they all look pretty much the same, and the only difference between them is size. So where one of them ends and the other one begins can get a bit subjective. But the first smallest stage is called early instar. And that's followed by mid instar. And then last is the largest stage is late instar. And it is the late instar stage that switchgrass midge spends the winter in, or diapauses in. So it enters this stage in mid to late summer, and then it remains there until the following spring, when it then pupates. And then eventually the new generation adults emerge from those pupae, and the cycle starts all over again. Okay, so it is the larvae that feed on switchgrass plants, and specifically they feed on the reproductive tissue, which results in stunted tillers and panicles that do not fully emerge. So we know that much, but overall switchgrass midge is not very well studied. There have only been a couple of studies done, and both of those were done in the United States. So there's a lot about its biology that we don't know, and we also don't really know how much, if any, crop loss it's causing, economic loss. And then in Ontario, because it's so new, we just discovered it here, we really don't know anything about, well, before we started our project, we didn't know anything about its biology or pest status here. So that brings me to our specific project objectives. I mean, our overall goal is just to figure out what the heck is going on with switchgrass midge here, but more specifically, we want to look at where it occurs across the switchgrass growing region of the province, when it occurs within a season, and when each life stage occurs. When it is there, how many of them are we seeing? What are the injury symptoms that they leave on plants? And then finally, within fields, where does it occur? So is it evenly distributed across fields, or is it an edge pest or some other type of pattern? And ultimately, we need to know all of that information before we can determine the pest status of it and if it's even causing a problem. And then if it is causing a problem, we need that information to be able to develop tactics to monitor for and manage it if necessary. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is what we've been seeing in terms of its distribution in the province. So to date, we have sampled from 12 switchgrass fields, and those locations are represented by the black circles on this map. So we've sampled from fields at the northern, southern, western, eastern edge of the switchgrass distribution, or sorry, switchgrass growing region. And then we've also taken some samples from fields in the middle. And basically what we found is that it is present at least in some number at every single one of those locations. And to be clear, this map just indicates presence only. It doesn't say anything about how many we found. I'll talk about that later. But based on this, it's pretty safe to assume at this point that it is occurring across the entire switchgrass growing region, and it is likely present in every switchgrass field, at least to some extent. Okay, so now that we know that it's everywhere, let's talk about what we've seen in terms of when it occurs during the season and in what kind of numbers. So to figure those things out, we sampled from one field in 2022 and then 3 fields in 2023. And so for both years between May until the crop was cut in October, we took plant samples weekly. Before the plants were at their reproductive stage, we would randomly sample 80 plants from each field. And this is because at that growth stage, you can't tell by looking at a plant from the outside of switchgrass midges inside of it. It doesn't leave any injury symptoms. And then once the plants were at reproductive stage, we switched to sampling 50 plants that had visible switchgrass midge-like injury. So then in addition to that, like after the field was cut rather, so between November and May, although we skipped December both years, until the crop was cut the following spring, we did do some sampling, but it was a little bit more haphazard. Sometimes we were out there weekly, sometimes not. But in those cases, we were sampling the cut plants from the ground, or in some cases, if there were standing tillers along the field margins that had been missed during cutting, we would take those. So in all cases, we then took each plant back to the lab and we opened it up, dissected it, and then we counted how many switchgrass midge of every life stage we found inside of them. So in addition to the plant sampling, we also tried to do some adult trapping because, like I said, the adults are free-flying midges. They don't occur inside of the plants. So in 2022, we tried just putting out some yellow sticky traps on wooden stakes at the edge of the field. That did not go well. So in 2023, we instead put a wooden cage covered in mesh at the edge of each of our fields. And then we put cut tillers from the ground. And then also if we could find any standing tillers, like I mentioned, from around the field margins inside of that cage. So again, these were plants from the previous year's crop from 2022. And then we put sticky traps up along the inside border of the cage. And then we would check and change those traps once a week. And those cages were out from about the end of May until the end of July. Okay, so now I'll talk about what we found in terms of just when it occurs in the season. So I'm going to try to walk you through this map and some of it, or this diagram, and some of it has gotten cut off. So this graph or this figure is showing 3 years worth of data. So data from 2021 is across the top, 2022 the middle, and 2023 at the bottom. So the data from 2022 and 2023, that represents the weekly sampling and the adult trapping that I just explained. 2021 was a bit different. This was the year before our project started. At this point, we knew that switchgrass midge was here. We didn't know anything about it. So we were just sort of we collected some preliminary data that year to sort of figure out what we were looking at and where we should focus our project objectives. So that year, we did not sample for as long during the season. We didn't sample from the same field every week. And when we did sample, we did not take as many plants as we did in the following 2 years. But I am going to include these data for the presence absence because it's still relevant. Okay, so in terms of interpreting this, these grayed out areas represent weeks where we did not sample plants at all. Any of the white areas are weeks that we sampled, but we did not find any switchgrass midge of any life stage. And then all of the colored bars represent weeks where we found at least one switchgrass midge in one of our samples and the corresponding life stage that we found. So the dark blue, which kind of looks black here, that is early instar larvae. The lighter blue is mid instar larvae. The green is late instar larvae, yellow is pupae, and then down here, red is adults. And I'll talk about the adults in a minute. And then the other thing is, and it's not showing up very well, but there's hatching here over these bars. So that the ones that are marked with these hatching represents individuals that we found in plants that we sampled, that were sampled from the previous year's crop. So these plants had been overwintered, they were from the 2022 crop. And that only happened in 2023. Okay. So I'll try to go over overall what we're seeing. So 2021 was the odd year. So we observed some early and mid instar larvae starting in June. And then from July until September, we observed consistently every instars of larvae every sampling week. So complete overlap between those stages. And then for most of the time, that same time period, we also were finding pupae inside of the plants. So we saw quite a different pattern the following 2 years. So in 2021, we didn't observe a single switchgrass midge of any stage until the very end of July. And then we only observed larvae, and the instars were more staggered than what we saw the previous year. So you see that we see first instar or early instar larvae first, and then mid instar larvae, and then the late instar larvae start showing up instead of all of them at once. And then 2023, like 2021, we did start seeing some early and mid instar larvae in June. But then like 2022, the stages were very staggered, although they occurred earlier, we started seeing them more regularly in early July as opposed to late July. But like 2022, they were more staggered. And then we also did not see any pupae in those plants. In terms of adults, we did not catch any adults in 2022. Those sticky traps didn't work. And then in 2023, we managed to catch 2 individuals, one the week of June 5th and one the week of June 12th. And then finally, I mentioned that we had found some stuff in plants from the previous season. So we found some late instar larvae the week in May, and then the week of June 5th. And then we found 1 pupa in 1 plant the week of June 5th. Okay, so what does this mean? So basically, the pattern that we observed in 2022 and 2023 was similar, and those years suggest that switchgrass midge has a single generation in Ontario. If there were multiple overlapping generations, we would expect to see more overlap between the larval instars, and then we would also expect to find pupae through June, July, and/or August. And you might be thinking that is exactly what we saw in 2021. But this pattern does suggest multiple overlapping generations, and even possibly more than 2 generations, just because of how long all the instars were present. Like that's a long time from mid-July until getting into late September. And sometimes insects will, they will normally have a single generation. And then if it's a very hot year, they may have a second, or they may have a partial second, or they may have 2 generations. And then in a hot year, they may have a third or a partial third. And that could be what's happening here. Although I meant to look this up and I can't remember if 2021 was hot or not. But it would be weird for an insect to normally have a single generation and then have 3 or more generations in a year. That's a big leap. That would have to be like a very hot year. So we aren't sure what happened this year yet, but given the last 2 years' data, we do feel that the most likely explanation is 1. But also that might become a little bit more clear when I start talking about numbers. Okay, so in terms of numbers of midge that we have seen, overall infestation rates have been low. But this does vary quite a bit from field to field across years. And then also varies from field to field within a year. And then it also varies between year to year within a field. So for example, we had a field that we started sampling in 2021 that was, this is relatively very infested. We didn't have any problems finding injured plants along the edge. And for the next 2 years, we have had such trouble finding midge in that field. So in 2022, we collected a total of 1,150 plants, and of those 12% contained at least one switchgrass midge. And then in 2023, of the 3,800 or just over 3,800 plants we collected, 24% contained switchgrass midge. However, we'll look at what that looked like over time because that was not consistent throughout the season. So in this graph shows the average numbers of plants that we collected weekly that were infested with at least one or contained at least one switchgrass midge. And this is from 2022. So you can see that until late July, we weren't finding none of the plants we collected had any midge in it. And then for the rest of the season, between 60 and 80% of them contained midge. So this pattern is at least partially because of the way that we sample, because I mentioned that early in the season, we are collecting plants randomly because we can't tell which ones have switchgrass midge in them until we open them up. And then later in the season, we are targeting plants that we think have the midge in it. So just because of that, we would expect that we would find a higher proportion of plants that were infested later in the season. However, if some proportion of the plants in a field are infested throughout the entire season, we would expect to collect at least some of those, some of the time, even by chance earlier in the season, even if we're sampling randomly. So this suggests that they were either not there at all, or they were present at such low numbers that we were missing them. And then here is the same data from 2023. So we did sample from 3 sites that year, but I'm only including 2 because the third site had so few infested plants and larvae, it wasn't really worth talking about. So again, like in 2022, we did not see very many infested plants until mid-July. And then after that, it went up considerably. The top part of the graph is cut off here, but it's at certain points, almost 100% of the plants we are collecting contain switchgrass midge at this site at the top. This site though, or this graph also shows nicely the potential differences that we see between fields within a year. Because overall the percent or the number of plants that we were collecting that were infested at this site was much higher consistently compared with this field. Okay, so that was the average number of plants that contained larvae. So this shows the number of larvae, the average number of larvae that we were seeing inside of those plants. So this is the field that we collected from in 2022. And overall that year, the number of larvae we were seeing was very low. At peak, we were seeing an average of 6 every week per plant. But overall, it was hovering more around 3. And that was sort of consistent across all the instars. And then this graph shows the same data for 2023. So compared to the previous year, we were seeing much more larvae. At the site, the field at the top here, we're seeing peaks of on average 30 per plant. But then down here at this site, we are still seeing more overall than the previous year, but much lower than this field. So at peak, we were seeing 20, and that didn't happen until late September. Usually it was fewer than 10 per plant. So that's what we are seeing in terms of numbers of larvae, but pupae in adults, we don't really know very much because finding them in the field has been very tricky for us. So I mentioned earlier in the presentation that the switchgrass midge, it overwinters as a late instar larvae, and then it pupates in the spring. So we know that at least a portion of the population, or we think at least a portion of the population pupates inside of the plants. And part of what might be happening is they pupate in the spring, but they probably pupate after you remove the crop from the field, the cut crop. So if we are sampling those cut plants, we don't ever see pupae because they're taken away before they have a chance. But you might be wondering, if that's the case, then where does the next generation of adults come from? Well, for one, We're pretty confident that Switchgrass Midge also likely uses some wild plants as a host in addition to switchgrass. So they would serve as a reservoir, but we do not know which ones yet. And then also, we have evidence that some of the population actually leaves the plants to pupate in the soil. So there was a study in the US that observed this. They found switchgrass midge pupate in the soil in a field they were working in. And we have observed that in plants in the lab. We have taken some switchgrass plants back to the lab and tried to rear adults out. And in some cases, the pupae leave the larvae leave the plants. However, so far we have not been able to find any pupae in the soil here. We have sifted some of that soil and not seen anything, but that's tricky to do. And then finally, in terms of adults, like I said, we've only tracked literally 2 adults across like 3 years of studying. We've seen 2. So we really don't know what's going on with the adults yet either. And then you may have noticed that I have not yet talked about eggs, and they weren't on that figure, and that's because we cannot find them. We have checked every single switchgrass plant that we have collected thoroughly for eggs, even parts of the plant where we wouldn't expect to find them. And to the best of our knowledge, we have never observed an egg. So we are not sure where they are laying their eggs yet. We still assume that it is somewhere on the plants. And it is possible that they may be inserting them into the plant tissue, which is why we don't see them during dissections, but that's something that we still have to confirm. Okay, so just to summarize, this is what we think this one generation looks like over kind of the more of like a crop cycle. I put it from May until May. So we are confident of when there are larvae present. And by the way, I meant this is when we think most of each life stage is present. Technically, there are some earlier than this, but we don't think that that's significant. So we're confident that there are larvae present here, but I have question marks for the adult eggs and pupae because we still don't know exactly when they're present, for how long they're present, or the degree of overlap between any of those stages. But our best hypothesis right now is that there is a single generation. It looks something like this. But this very well could change as we continue to collect data over the next few years. And then before I leave this section, I just wanted to briefly mention what we're doing in terms of injury symptoms. So this past year, we took a photo of every single plant that we collected before we dissected it. So we are currently still analyzing those photos, so I don't really tell you about today yet. But what we want to do with those photos is generate a general, more descriptive injury symptom guide so that we know what to, and you know what to look for. We also want to see if there's any correlation between the number of larvae that we might find in a plant and the degree of injury that that plant has. And then finally, we want to better understand what proportion of injured plants actually contain switchgrass midge, because as you saw, sometimes plants that look like they do have that injury don't contain any larvae. So we want to kind of get a better idea of what's going on there. Okay, and the last results I want to talk about are what we've been seeing in terms of its distribution inside of fields. So to assess this, we have sampled from 2 fields, one in 2022 and one in 2023. So what we've done is we go out the day that the field is being cut, and we walk along a cut path, and we take samples of about 10 plants from different locations inside of the field. So this photo shows what we did in 2022. So this year at this field, we walked a single transect basically right down the center of the field, lengthwise, and we sampled along that path from 9 locations, and that's represented by these circles. So the blue circles are locations where we found at least 1 larva inside of at least 1 plant, and the white circles are areas where we didn't find anything. So even though we did not find it at every single sampling location, you can see that we did find it distributed throughout the entire field, including in the very center. And then here at a different field is what we did in 2023. So for this field, we did not get as far in, but we did get in well past the edges. And again, we found it at almost every single location that we sampled at. So when you take these two fields together, right now it's safe to assume that switchgrass midge is distributed throughout fields as opposed to just being an edge pest. However, we don't know if the numbers change depending on where they are in the field. So it's possible they have a higher density at the edge than in the center. That is something that we still have to figure out and we'll be working on over the next few years. Okay, so that's what we know so far. Now I'm just going to talk to you about what we're planning on doing next. So we're going to continue our weekly sampling and counting of larvae like we've been doing, and we're actually probably looking for some more sites, right? And then in addition to that, this year we have a large uncut stand that was left from last year that we will be able to sample from all through the spring and into the summer. And we've actually already started sampling from that. And thank you for working with us on that, James. So that being able to sample from that stand will hopefully allow us to find pupae and figure out where they are and how long they're there. And then we are going to continue trying to find adults. So this time though, we're going to try a new type of cage, and we're actually going to put that cage or those cages over that same stand from last year. And so hopefully then we will be able to isolate them, and whether they're emerging from the plants, the soil, or it doesn't matter, we should catch them that way, I hope. I might try to do some small cage studies where I've set up little cages on this year's crop, the new plants, and then release adults into those cages that we rear out in the lab. And then hopefully they will lay their eggs on those cages or on those plants, and we can find the eggs. No promises though. And then finally, we're going to continue to do more field transects. But I think this year we're going to do that earlier in the season before cutting so that we can target specific areas and also get a better idea of density at those locations. And then, by the way, we have a new master's student starting in May, Clarissa, who will be helping us with all of this. And you'll probably see her at next year's meeting presenting her results. And then last thing, we applied for and received some new funding last year from the NSERC Alliance program. So with that money, we're actually going to be doing two brand new things. So first, we're going to do some DNA barcoding of the switchgrass midge and the parasitoids that we find along with it inside the plants. So there are multiple parasitoids associated with it. We don't know what they are yet because they haven't been identified, but we do not believe that they are all parasitoids of switchgrass midge, and we're having a hard time figuring out which one is. So doing this barcoding will help us ID them, and it'll also serve the basis for future studies, like maybe some genetic studies of the parasitoids and the midge. And then finally, we are going to try to identify and then have synthesized a sex pheromone from switchgrass midge. So females release a sex pheromone to attract males for the purposes of mating. So if we can find one of those for this midge and synthesize it, it could be used in a lure with a trap for the purposes of trapping males throughout the season and monitoring for adult activity. And that would tell us a lot more, hopefully, about adults than what we're doing now, and they'd be easier to find. Oops. Okay, so that's all that I have to share today. I just want to thank the Ontario Biomass Producers for your support on this, and those specific growers for allowing us access to their properties and fields for sampling. And an extra thank you to Scott and James for working with us during cutting and coordinating with us and leaving uncut plants for us. And then all of the names listed at the bottom, those are all of our research assistants that have spent many, many, many hours photographing and dissecting switchgrass plants. So we're very grateful to them for that. Thanks.